So open request. If you're comfortable leaving your cameras on, please do so. I find it's just a little more interaction. I have it set up. Will be able to monitor the chat if you have questions real time. And otherwise, again, as Cheryl mentioned, feel free to reach out to me afterwards. And let's see. And everyone should see the slides at this point. People see the title slide. Do I need to switch?
No, it looks good, Raymond. Thank you.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Today, you're going to learn a little bit about needs and requirements development. And it's going to key off a theme that we covered in the NCOSE Technical Leadership Institute. If you have a chance to apply to that, it's a 2-year cohort program where we study themes like leadership, management, complexity, but unlike the large body of literature out there already in the business literature, we address it from a systems engineering perspective. Technical projects, engineering projects, how do we bring in leadership there? And one of our themes was collaboration. And I do a lot of requirements work. I help programs succeed by untangling requirements for large programs. So collecting needs correctly, doing requirements analysis, that's something that I've really seen help programs stay on track, stay on budget. And something we found, and we're really trying to explore here is, it's definitely a team effort, as you may have experienced, getting stakeholder agreement and finding out what is the true operational process. Even in doing requirements reviews and getting requirements down, we're working with maybe a systems team and maybe some component groups or even some remote groups. So there's a new level of collaboration needed there. So those are the things we're going to cover. And by the end, you'll have some ideas on how to improve collaboration and also bring in possibly some systems thinking to your organization if you're on a program that's having problems. My name is Raymond Wolfgang. I do currently work at Sandia, but very much available on LinkedIn. Link is there. I've been involved with NCOSE for quite a bit. I was on the requirements group until about a couple months ago. I segued off of being a co-chair. I'm still on the group. I was a co-chair for a long time, for a couple of years for that group. And if you want in-depth needs and requirements work, the NCOSE store just has some recent documents out, some manuals and some guides that really go into a lot more depth than the systems engineering handbook. So if you have questions there, reach out to me. I can help you get the right resource for your needs. But again, if you need me, reach me quick for NCOSE stuff. LinkedIn is probably the best way to do it. I'm pretty active there. Now obviously we've heard a lot about model-based systems engineering, and I am a big fan of these tools. You may use a lot of these tools in your workplace, but it's still, engineering is still a very human endeavor. I forget exactly who came up with that quote, but there's different interpretations. I'm working on a program now, and I recently was involved in revising a safety specification. It's a transport program, and we were just having a lot of very capable engineers have very different interpretations of the same requirements document, to the point where we had to do a rewrite, actually, top to bottom, really scrub it pretty well. Now it's better, but it just goes to show, the mechanical engineer might see it one way, and the electrical engineer see it in a different way. Now, the tools can very much help for the digital ecosystem, but the tool can't do it all. So we go back to sort of old school human interaction, which is and this is the three sections of the talk. You know, making sure we have the collaboration in place, identifying barriers to communication. You know, maybe one group's not getting the memos, and then a larger part, and there's more. There are other papers on this I can refer you to. Is culture. You know, is the environment that we work in, is it instinctively sort of big picture focused, where we're asking, okay, well, who else might need to know, and who should we deal in, or is it maybe a manufacturing heritage where once we get the prints, you know, we're nose to the cutting mill and cranking out our parts. So one culture is not better than another, but there are some cultural aspects we could bring in that's going to help us give an outcome of solid needs documentation and a good requirement set. With either culture, you can get there eventually, but sometimes there are easier ways to Sunday. Configuration management will be assumed through this. Without rigorous configuration management, and if it becomes a mess, you know, if we don't know where the right drawing is or where the latest version is. So that'll be an assumption throughout. And of course, this precludes, well, not of course, there are times when it's a genuinely hostile atmosphere, some might call it toxic atmosphere. This talk does not address that. That's a larger issue where, you know, management needs to get involved. This is more maybe of experience where people mean well, basically cordial, but somehow things aren't clicking. Now, a lot of this does come from some NCOSE products. There's a needs and requirements manual. Came out maybe roughly about a year ago. It's on version 1.1 in the NCOSE store. This will be just key excerpts from that will relate to collaboration, but in a needs and requirements development context. The communications is right next to it. And then the source from the collaborative systems thinking part of it, that is from an IS 2022 paper, the International Symposium. Our Leadership Institute cohort created submitted and got a poster into IS 2022, where we go a little more into like the steps of how you would introduce this some systems thinking and change culture. When we're talking about culture change, very often that's organizational dynamics, you know, process change initiatives, and there are models that'll help. We propose one. You might be familiar with Kotter's change model, which is not specific to engineering. It's a little broader, but covers the same territory. Making things better is important work, but sometimes it's not always a technical endeavor. Okay, so third here, we're gonna jump into collaboration. As you can imagine, without it, things grind to a standstill pretty quickly. Now there's some areas of collaboration that maybe we don't appreciate right off. It's unless you work regularly with purchase orders, statements of work, SALs, and certain quality documents that go along with statements of work, you know, communicating specs. There's a lot of collaboration because once we cut the supplier a check, you know, sometimes if we don't have that relationship, you know, if we want to make even a small change, you know, they might charge us, they might use that as an income generating moment, which is not necessarily what we want. So now for large development programs, which I've been fortunate enough to work on, a lot of times we're working across sites. You know, we work a lot with individuals in Kansas City for our line of work at Sandia. So collaboration, and I've found just giving people the benefit of the doubt. I've seen it where just assuming noble motive can really improve the relationship and just help people let us in, you know, to influence and motivate. If we go in there with like, man, these people don't want to work, or they just want to nickel and dime us, sometimes that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So underneath collaboration is assuming at least getting our story straight to where, we're, again, benefit of the doubt. Now, patent fraud, manipulation, that needs to be called out. There's certain things that are not appropriate, but there's a balance. And some of this ties to safety, is for those familiar with Dr. Brene Brown's work, if we remove safety and we have something called a shame-based culture, I like to call it shame-based leadership and motivation, where we march someone up and then we blame them and then we beat them up in public and then expect them to go back to the desk with this newfound vim and vigor for the project. All right, so obviously that can be flawed. Let me put in a plug. I read Dare to Lead. Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, speaks to a lot of this, and I very much got a lot of value out of that one. But that lays out the with safety. There's got to be safety before there's collaboration. And now this is from the manual. With many of us work on projects teams. It's a mix. We'll have the project management staff if we have a large program on. Then we've got the different subject matter experts, basically going clockwise around from the top. All these are blended in, and less than half might be full time on a project or program. However, if we don't bring in manufacturing in, then that could be an issue. And manufacturing, I include that software manufacturing, which is line coders. There's the test and verification team, and particularly with, again, part of my focus is larger programs, but there's procurement. Someone cognizant needs to be able to write a statement of work where we're going to get what we need. Rarely do we get hardware in early, particularly with COVID and supply chain issues. So then, of course, interacting with technical and project and line management. Another bit is in the midst of all this, where different groups are incentivized differently. So like the analysis and modeling group might be incentivized to, get simulation results. They might not be incentivized directly to have the results segue into our verification plans or our verification traceability matrix. So again, what I've seen work is assuming noble motive, but then also unfolding and asking questions about, okay, well, how are things? What are you judged on? You can't really ask, hey, what's your incentive structure? People might not understand that, but we can ask questions. We can ask different questions to sort of find out what drives them. How do they prioritize their time? And that's particularly helpful, asking why people don't use model-based systems engineering. This isn't an MBSE talk, but very briefly, I was asked to do some sequence diagram work, but the time frame was such that I was lucky to get it done. Just whip something up in Visio, and that's all they wanted. They weren't looking for a digital ecosystem. They just wanted some bootstrap diagrams to help the designers. Okay, well, that's how they were incentivized, and I was on their payroll, so that drove my actions. Now, some of us are working on Agile, and Agile can be very effective. However, the Agile does not mean go off into our cubbyhole and just do our thing. And in 2 weeks, at the end of the sprint, we come back and deliver our results. Sometimes it is, I should say. So sometimes it is that way, but there's still collaboration on crafting what are called stories, and then crafting the sprints. Because we don't want to just send someone off on a sprint but we didn't really think it through, and they brought something back, and well, you have to go back and resprint and to fix it. So it's technically agile, but it can be frustrating. There's infrastructure, of how you set it all up in an agile program. And you could do collaboration in an agile and still be nimble. Okay, so collaboration doesn't preclude being flexible and nimble, as it were. So now there is a trade-off. If we're too collaborative, sometimes you hear complaints of, gosh, we have too many meetings. That is a real issue. I mean, at some point, particularly if you're doing software, once the requirements are set, we have to let the coder alone do their bit for whatever 2-week, 3-week sprint it is, and leave them alone. So we can't incorporate everybody. At some point, it all grinds to a halt. To handle that, a lot of times we'll have a team structure that you're probably familiar with. We have kind of a more core team up top. It's a mix of PM and systems engineering. There are different working groups. There's the PM working group and then the systems engineering and integration working group. You can have different working groups off of the main top team. There's some subject matter experts that you bring in as needed. And then at some point you'll have a different support personnel based on where you are in the life cycle. So in the beginning, these could be requirements developers, it moves on to maybe designers, and then you're bringing in your V&V team, verification team, your validation team as a project matures and starts to complete. Now, I know we have some people in the systems engineering for R&D working group. So Ann, I know, is involved there. One of the themes, actually not so much for systems, the R&D, but there is a move. Pardon, I'm crossing terms here, but in the requirements working group, there is a theme of trying to bring in verification and not necessarily validation, but verification work earlier on into the life cycle. So for those familiar with the systems V, we might recall that we start with some needs, go down the requirements. Now we're doing mock-ups. We have architectures and a model-based systems engineering tool can do this very quickly. You'll get a candidate design so early on, and you can show that to the customer. And now we have a verification step to see whether our architecture can even be executable. And then also a validation step where we can show it to the customer and say, hey, will this, as far as you can tell, meet your pain point? Will that meet your need while you're giving us money to do engineering? They say, no, I forgot, it has to weigh less than 50 pounds, or has to be something called person portable. I think that's 2 people, has to be under 70 pounds. So that's a thing. So this early feedback, we call it early verification and validation, that can save a lot of money downstream too. So this team structure, it's just a guideline. You might need V&V people early, and we may need our requirements experts later on when we're trying to, run exceptions or just get these requirements right because we realized, we're missing one. Okay, any questions so far? Just the general idea of collaboration, getting the right people depending on the life cycle phase. And let's see, I'll fire the chat. I see a few things in chat. Okay, got the meeting materials.
Yep. Raymond, I'm going to ask you a question on collaboration, since you said you've been in some large scale programs before. What kind of tips and tricks did you find to get large teams to collaborate and work together? And I mean, I know there's things that we say we need to do it, but what kind of things did you find helped to bring these disparate teams together and wanting to work together and collaborate together? So any tips and tricks you can share?
Yeah, actually, in fact, I'll let me share just anecdotally something that's worked on our current program. I'll stay general. we have a situation where it's multiple buildings. So we have our systems team is more or less in one building, but our coders are in a different building and a different department. And then we have a large group of matrix people in general. So 4 people from over here, 1 person from over there. And we were having trouble getting wisdom and discussion that happened at the systems level. So we have a systems team meeting. Okay, well, each week we'll bring up a different topic, and these meetings are currently ongoing. The leads attend, systems leads, major subsystem leads, and we will discuss issue it is. Let's say for you do a transportation system. So just making up an example, heating and cooling. Okay, all right. Well, how will our temperature control work? And we'll talk about some issues there, some sensors. And okay, that's great. But we had trouble moving that to the actual coders and designers. We write our specifications and we have requirements management and all that, but sometimes that can take time. So what I started was a kind of a module staff meeting. So you have the systems team, you have the subsystem leads, but then below that, you've got in the architecture, you have different modules that you work on. So you might have a power module, you might have a sensor module. Again, very abstracting here. Well, it just brought them in kind of lower level, and just we would go walk through different decisions from our decisions matrix and just say, okay, hey, this decision came up in the systems team, and we decided that we're gonna, use Java. Okay, that's not what we're doing, but just as an example. Then you say, well, when was someone going to tell us we're going to use Java? Or, well, okay, well, we thought we were going to use this other more real-time operating system because, where we're doing sensors and real-time feedback control, we tend to not, we don't want to use, Windows, Windows Server 2008, something like that. So just having this meeting series, which, I mean, no one wanted a new meeting at first, but when we started walking through these decisions and people realized, hey, there is a gap, information is stalling as it's flowing down the architecture. Now it's people like it. People look for it. In fact, it was bi-weekly. People said, hey, we're not getting through this quickly enough, and now it's a weekly meeting where it's simply a back and forth. And also the other advantage there was we got some actions coming up saying, hey, you want us to, use all these variables, you define these variables you want. Why don't you give us a table where all these variables are listed and what they're doing? Simplified example. But it's bottom line, it was an additional meeting series, and the agendas were clear, and it was basically to go over and dialogue and debate on discussions at the system level that were relevant to actually writing code and developing your what would really be a subcomponent. So that was, and that's let's see, still communication issues, but that closed some of the gaps.
Thank you for sharing.
No, that is a good question. Well, and the other half of that, Cheryl, is what helped was listening, honestly, because there were some rumblings about a module owner would occasionally come in and say, well, they'd say something in a meeting, and it's like, well, at the systems meeting, we decided to not do that. We did it another way. So listening to clues that, oh, these people, capable as they are uninformed. So there's a flag of, oh, they're not getting, the decisions. And then there started to be complaints about, hey, I don't have enough requirements, or something like, I thought I'd get this interface document and it's been 6 months or something. So, and that's not always comfortable, like listening to rumblings, but keeping the ear to the ground helped just identify that, oh yeah, here's a gap, and then now you can address it. So, all right, perhaps a long answer, but very relevant because of the This will come back up later in the brief. That was great. Cheryl, any other quick thoughts before we jump on? Okay.
Does anybody else want to move on?
Just a real quick comment, Raymond.
Yeah,
You
sure.
mentioned, and I love what you said.
I'd like to see.
Verification should be done early in the life cycle. I contend also that validation has its place early in the life cycle as well. Validation addresses the question of, are we building the right product? And verification, of course, is answering the question, are we building the product right? And early in the life cycle, you should be making sure that the team understands the mission needs and requirements, and that the architecture, design, etc., as you kind of go down the V on the left side, those artifacts are going to be sufficient to meet the needs. That's my 25 cents.
No, that's absolutely. In fact, that's the third bit of it. So, Cheryl, just for your larger question, you'll consider a meeting series where appropriate, listen to grumblings and look for flags that communication's not getting there. And then for Ann, let me go one level up there. Prepare the customer for more meetings than they probably expect. I had a client years ago, and they thought they just sort of told us about the problem, and then we would just sort of do it. So, okay, well, no, we're gonna have to meet monthly. We're gonna have to show you our architecture, and then the colonel, it was a lieutenant colonel involved. And like, what are you talking about? I thought you were the smart folks. Eventually, he was a very sharp leader, so we had to socialize. Okay, if we meet along the way, we're really gonna crush it, on the back end. He's like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I want the right product, and that'll be great. And but socializing with the customer is like, hey, you can't just write us a check and then wait a year. We're going to have to get your time. And all customers are busy; they have their day job. But to fight for that, to share that early validation, well, and get that early validation. So those are the three I'd recommend. And great point. Thank you. Okay, let's jump to the next segment here when we go. Just pivoting the communications. We can all be tremendously collaborative. If we're collaborating the wrong info, that's going to be a mess. Here's where digital ecosystem can really be powerful, because, like SysML drawings, their main personal opinion, one of their main purposes is to communicate the same message to multiple different groups. This assumes configuration management, obviously change control, which we had not mentioned before. And if two people don't get along and are not communicating, that actually becomes an impact on the technical product as well. So I tell you, nothing can sync something where I'm not speaking to so-and-so, and oh yeah, they're the verification lead. so good luck getting the right test. It's of course it's funny until you have to spend another $500K fixing it that you didn't have to. So for that, and again, the reference is NRM section 210, is again some of this deep communication, and segued some of this with early validation with the customer. In this transporter program I'm working, we're working with the government department, where they have federal agents who, they do shift work. It's basically like the U.S. Marshals or police, and we as designers, we need to understand their world, because they're going to be using our product as they're rolling across the country. Fortunately, we had a government customer who used to be one of those agents. And so he could tell us, okay, well, an agent wouldn't do that, or that GUI, the user interface, that's just not how an agent would resonate. So, okay, well, we move some buttons around, and now we have a product that's much more akin to how the user thinks. So for that It's just deep communications, and the half of communications is listening and letting people talk. So, of course, the other half is translating those discussions into requirement specs. So, okay, so now the good news is we know how to do this. Okay, there are structures, we could use a model, but I didn't appreciate this early in my career. Let me throw this open. You can throw this in the chat. Let's see, who's responsible for ensuring that the message is properly received? Is it the sender's job to communicate it well, or is it the receiver's job to listen and be cognizant and know the situation? So who ultimately is responsible? You can unmute or throw it in the chat. All right, 50 chance. Okay, and thanks, both sender and receiver. Other thoughts? Okay, I would now, just my opinion, of course, I would propose that, thanks Juan for chiming in, that it rests on the sender. And the reason the reason I feel that is that only the sender knows what was actually intended. The receiver can be as assiduous and great listening skills, but if somehow it doesn't come out right, or if the receiver's context is production and we're in research and development, there'll be a gap. Okay, and some of this, it's a busy slide, some of this is in this model. So if you jump to the upper right here, it's the message as understood, after it goes through all these filters. And our filters can be the map of the world. It could be we could not have had our coffee yet. It could be how we're incentivized, or it could be instructions we receive from our management that maybe conflict with and our own agenda. Now, to solve this, it's easy to miss, is just checking and asking questions. And sometimes, and I've experienced this in the past, mostly with outside of work, we'll say, hey, it was some contractors. I needed a little bit of housework done, like some structural work. And so, okay, well, it was installing a skylight. And it says, okay, we need a skylight here, and it's 2 by 2, or well, somehow that conflict, and they nod their heads. Oh, yeah, we got it. Well, turns out that conflicted with the work order, and they wound up framing it wrong. And all of a sudden, it's like, hey, wait, that's the wrong size. Well, you said such and such. It's like, all right, well, obviously I said something wrong. Now they were willing to fix it, but it's one of these things where I just thought I answered the question, and they had a very different opinion of what it should look like. And they were so polite, they were gracious. They didn't want to upset the client. They didn't say oh, you know what, that's different than what's on the work order. Let's discuss. They're like, okay, yeah, we're on it. Like, okay, well, that was a minor example, but that's on your program, and you've spent $50K, you're writing code that basically is not going to integrate. Well, now you have to respend that $50K. So if you're at a generally polite culture, sometimes you need to pull out, okay, well, what did you hear? Why don't you repeat back to me how you're going to do it, or what you thought you heard? It can feel tedious at first, but sure enough, there's a lot of times some gem where it's, oh, you know what, that's actually not correct. We're doing, this architecture instead of made for programming, instead of .NET, we're doing C#, who knows, but now something that can really help communicate effectively is getting rapport. For those who have studied neurolinguistic programming, I recommend Googling that. I found that pretty effective on really connecting with another human being to communicate something, particularly if it's bad news or there's conflict as well. Finally, for this, you may have heard of 3 different modalities. There's visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. It can help to know that about a person because that can shape our language. And like if Cheryl's visual, I can say, "Hey Cheryl, I see what you mean." But if Anne is more kinesthetic, it's like, "Oh, Anne, it feels like you're going in this direction. Is that what we want to do?" So little things like that add up, and particularly if if money's tight on your program and you can't do it twice, we're looking for every advantage here. Now, you might be thinking, well, Ray, this is great. Okay, I'll go on. Maybe I'll add a meeting or two, and I'll keep NLP in mind. But as leaders, I would argue that systems engineering, by its role, involves leadership. We need to find a way to have this stick on our teams without us being there guiding it all. So how do we keep these changes long term? I mean, it's exhaustive to just sort of have this in the front all the time. How do we cultivate a habit or a culture where we're thinking big picture, we're looking for communication gaps, basically we reduce the risk of some of these rework issues that come up. Okay, so first, there's training. There is a way, if you're willing to train enough people, you can all of a sudden you can at least familiarize everybody with where we're trying to go. Now, I get it, training's expensive, but depending on the depth of the cultural change, there's going to be some investment involved. Maybe not up front. You could go some ways with grassroots, but particularly with model-based systems engineering, if we want engineers to use the tool, I really got a lot out of these 4-day, 5-day, boot camp type courses, where now I at least have seen the tool, and if policy comes down to start using it, I'm not panicked. I have a lot of fear around change, or as much fear, and there's less silent resistance. I suspect there's people on the call might have experienced sort of this silent resistance. That's hard to detect. So point is, this is all possible. However, what can help is a collaborative systems thinking culture. And again, this brings up, this was team effort with the rest of the cohort. There's a full author list on the IS paper and more detail there. We going to go back to talking about culture. And I think we're going to find reward here, because we all work in an incentive structure, particularly if we've had more than a few years of experience. And what the innovation I propose here, we propose on this team, is thinking of culture, but also considering adding systems thinking into this culture. So now, systems thinking there's definitions out there. I like to call it trying to think in terms of who else might my job affect, who else should know, and if I make a decision or an action, what else could it affect? Think of development programs as a system. A lot of times we are building a system to deploy, and just kind of keeping it in mind. Not something that's formal, but really a mindset shift, if I can call it that. So a perspective shift. Now, why bake into, why go all the way up the culture? At least in my own workplace, the programs we're getting, they're complex. A lot of times it's a one-off. We're designing a new tractor trailer. We can't just pull one off the shelf. Like a DigiKey, an electronic parts supply. A lot of times our requirements will change mid-program. so we need to be able to adjust and, integrate a new need with what we've built already. Okay, well, that involves a bigger picture thinking. Now when we do the blend, we're calling that a collaborative systems thinking culture. And collaborative systems thinking, we're using the Lamb and Rhodes definition. It's an emergent behavior of teams from interactions of team members, and we have different styles, we have different approaches, we have different modalities in how we learn, visual, kinesthetic, and auditory. It's considering all this and how all that interacts, and using all that to create a executable product and to design. We're designing a system that solves a problem, but we're using collaborative systems thinking in developing our product. Particularly since everyone wants us to do more with less money. This at this point, the trend. We need to consider big picture things like this. So, systems thinking is obviously half of it. And then just a sense of the culture for organization. So, the good news is that we can move toward it, and we don't have to do it all at once. Sometimes change takes time. A friend of mine who made a director would often say, we're on our journey, which means, maybe we're not deploying MBSE as quickly as we'd like, just as an example, but we've started and we're chipping away at it, and we're doing 2-degree shifts to get in the right direction, and that's okay. Again, change sometimes takes time. Now the benefits for this, and I'll speak to the benefits of blending both of them together, systems thinking and looking at cultural aspects. Some of these are benefits of systems engineering. Some are benefits of just even getting good project management. But it's the same context of we're trying to have accurate costs, so we don't have to ask for money late in the program. Reduce rework. If we really delve into this, we might be able to reduce the number of prototype builds that we have that were lower cost. We could be smarter with expectation management with the customer. If the customer is happy at the end, that's, in my book, that's success. So, but that relationship has to be managed. And then we could still sort of let subsystem designers and component designers go off, but we've given them the tools to succeed. And then integration testing is just less of a headache. It doesn't remove everything, but it's much less of a schedule risk, frankly. If we can queue this up. Okay, so the big question is, all right, so how do we do this? All right, well, we've got here's the 7-step process, from the paper, but first, we have to get a snapshot of the current state. Okay, that could be some surveys, some interviews, collecting anecdotal experiences. The driver here is we want to queue up to leadership and saying, hey, look, here's the current state. Here are problems that we're having. We feel that if we had a collaborative systems thinking culture or more systems thinking, we feel we could have avoided these problems and we could save this money over here because, Joe still doesn't understand if we're using C or if we're using Java. It's expensive to just pay Joe to sit around and be confused. So after that, recommendation is starting small, unless you have a very senior executive that issues an edict of we're moving here. That will be needed at some point, but unless you have that early on, we as a team, we recommended starting small, get some sandbox projects, and then just show some wins. Show some quick wins. That management then can use this, particularly management who's on our side. We give them some some material, some grist for them to make the sale to their management, that, some resources should be committed. Once some projects are executed, we'll have a good feel for kind of the process for our larger scale rollout. And a lot of times we're not going to know that until we've got lessons learned from these smaller projects. Then we start a rollout. Let's say for a program, we're going to structure, we have these meetings, and then we're going to move to a more a digital ecosystem tool. Maybe not everything, but maybe requirements and architecture we'll put in this model-based systems engineering tool. All right, great. Well, once we do that, okay, there are going to be some barriers. Maybe people don't know the tool. All right, well, then we throw some training at it. Or people are upset because there's a synchronization issue between one database and another, or one database and our MBSE tool. All right, well, that's a little trickier, but there are ways around that. Knocking out barriers. If sometimes things slow, we don't want things to slow down at this point because we've got momentum, we've got some management buy-in. And if people sort of give up their hands, we'll go back to our old ways because that's human nature, which is not going to land the systems thinking into the culture that's needed for all this to run without our being there. Okay, to finish this one up, we're checking on gaps, again, fixing holes in the process. The final gap might be training the second half of the project. It could be a funding thing. Okay, so then we would have to queue up our request for budget. And then finally, and this is where some projects, some otherwise successful projects, sometimes they don't do, if you baseball or softball fan, don't quite get that follow through. So it's when the new system has enough adherence to where people like it, they see the benefit. It's cooking the training into normal and formal training that new project members get. Sustain it. Move what was new into operational policy to where now that's the way of doing business. And since that whole endeavor was so much fun, we look for more gaps. Where else could we improve? Could we now go more digital, perhaps? This continuous and never-ending improvement. Even in my own workplace, which is maybe more of a government situation. If we're not innovating and improving, our customer will complain, and they complain too much. They're on a whole lot of other people, but they'll find ways to get someone else. So, but anchoring in the gains will make it stick and will preserve the incredibly hard work up to this point. And what's not shown here is, there's some nights and weekends trying to get this going to move it forward, particularly in the early stage. So now for just looking for, at this point, we want enablers and look for barriers. So enablers, again, circling back to communication. And collaboration there is part of it. This does not mean quashing contrary opinions. If people don't feel heard, they'll tune out. And this is part of systems thinking, just sort of maintaining they call it situational awareness, or sometimes they call it sensory acuity. Flags, though, for this is, hero culture, trying to just bootstrap it and get her done. With very competent people, this is an issue because a lot of times they can pull it off. Okay, well, that actually hurts more than helps because the root problems aren't addressed. If teams seem fragmented. Now, teams can be in different states, actually, but, where, like, for instance, our human factors team on this project, the lead is in a different state, but we make an effort to include her in meetings, make the meetings unclassified when possible. When you're not co-located, we got to keep an eye on fragmentation. It can all work when it's dispersed. It just takes being aware and making sure someone just doesn't go off into in the ether. Too busy to even get their head up from the desk. That's a flag. That does happen on some programs, but if no one has any time whatsoever, or like a year and a half, or the length of the program, you burn people out, and also it's okay. Well, does it really have to be this way? And then there's a natural aversion to change, which is part of human nature. But finally, for this, and then we'll move on to a workshop we had on this soon. So we're getting to some results from the discussions here. Look at the incentive structure. A lot of initiatives fail, in my suspicion and observation, where we're incentivized this way, but the program, want us to go this way or something. So people, in my experience, react to how they're motivated, and myself included. I've sort of purposely not done MBSE because I was heavily incentivized to do it in a certain other way. So not exempt. Okay, so for last bit of the brief, we'll go over some workshop results, and then I'll talk a little, and then next steps. So we had a workshop. It was a Technical Leadership Institute workshop over all the cohorts, brainstorming session, shared spaces, and we learned quite a bit. Everyone agreed you can't just tell people, all right, we're going to do collaboration, so collaborate and let us know how it goes. That's just going to fall flat. Mostly the first question will be, well, what does that mean? You can't really tell people to do what systems thinking is, because if you're not naturally thinking abstractly, that's hard to grasp sometimes. For big picture mindsets, maybe less hard than others, but again, this is where training people in this can help. So don't neglect small steps. People very much like Miro, some of these other collaboration tools. We ran the workshop as a Miro exercise. And others did agree that, okay, there's still rework out there we can prevent. And again, there's a pretty unified opinion that, okay, at some point you have to train people and maybe retrain them. And if you really want to get deep penetration into the culture and do a pivot. A lot of people had some successes there, in out there in the space and industry and government. There's a lot of collaboration. People are using some clever tools. They might call it something different, but this is out there. We're not starting at ground zero. Also, you don't necessarily need a technical background to do this. Systems thinking can be espoused by pretty much anyone, in my opinion. Certainly, individuals maybe at a technician level or the project management staff can be absolutely great systems thinkers. A lot of them have the experience to know where the potholes are if you're trying to move something forward. Building relationships, just in a session today with my work unit, and over again, relationship building as far as working with production or working with other collaborators. It's being able to phone a friend, and sometimes you do that in 5 minutes where you'd lose hours if there was conflict or misinterpreted communications. Please don't try and drive a lot of this via email. That's burnt me more times than once doing that. So, and we talked about incentives. What I tried here from all this, in our program, we introduced, we actually had 2 meeting series. We had an additional systems team meeting where we just talked about technical issues, not programmatics, not schedule, but just getting people's, thoughts about the technical issues of the day. How do we do this, or what subcomponents responsible for that? That got the dialogue that was spoken in the hallways out into the space. So where the technical lead, the systems lead could at least absorb it, and we do some documentation. We have a very strict action items and decisions list that we monitor and maintain and publish. So there's some artifacts that we distribute as part to basically close the loop. It's so, and that's worked well. You know, the people are a little happier. They feel they're heard, and you know, there's I don't know survey results, but you know, there's fewer complaints, just in my experience, and people at least feel they have a venue. Okay. Also, at the systems level, we know what to prioritize. You know, people really want maybe a certain interface document out, so now we can serve them. The other thing, actually, with the workshop and just personal experience is, you know, do some after hours things. Now, family time is important, but in our Toastmasters group, we've had we had a happy hour one time, and then later we had a farewell dinner for a former club president who was moving on. You know, it's not technical, but that really has built up fellowship within the club, and it can build up fellowship within the team, the work team. Just occasionally going out bowling once in a while. Years ago, before they banned it, we did go-karts as a department. We still talk about that as having fun. That helps when it's time to make a tough call and saying, hey, we have another production snafu, and we have to get this lot out by the end of the week. So it's there's creativity here. All right, so we're wrapping up. The upside is large, better products, better odds of hitting cost and schedule. Takeaway here is I had to sort of clean this up in my own head, as where I had to get the systems thinking. I had to think collaboration more. I had to, I tend not to look at culture in the first step, but I had to start looking at what the culture is, and then mastering my stories, to borrow something from Vital Smarts. Giving people the benefit of the doubt. Moving in with assuming no motive has just really helped. So I need to clean up my own side of the street first to pull all this off. This is important work. To conclude, needs and requirements a lot of times define whether or not a project succeeds or not. You see program after program fail, and gosh, you look online in the Spanish rail company, so this Renfe, they had this $270 million order for trains, some of which would not fit in their tunnels. They were too tall, and the gauge wasn't right for some of these older, sometimes 100-year-old train tracks in northern Spain. Okay, well, they fixed it, and they didn't cut metal, but now it's extra 2 years at a burn rate that's pretty high. So some political appointees lost their jobs over that. That was a big one. And again, the requirements right up front would have solved it. So we do important work, even involved in systems engineering. It's important. We're talking time and money. Some of us are using taxpayer money, which needs to be respected. So moving toward this collaborative systems thinking culture can help with our needs and requirements development. It's going to take being open, a little bit of vulnerability, far more from Brene Brown, some collaboration, but it's going to pay back and reduce rework, and frankly, a more pleasant place to spend our work in our careers. Okay, let me take a few questions, and then I can kick off with a final comment. Floor is open.
Okay, I'll start. See if anybody else
Great.
chimes
Thanks,
in. So if you're in a culture that doesn't think systems thinking, like it's totally foreign to them, they're totally new to it, how do you go about starting that? You just start looking for pain points and trying to explain how the systems approach would help with the problem? Do you kind of become the person holding the flag up?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Cheryl. Thank you. Let's see. So how I started these meetings and how I persuaded people to attend was I did not come in and say, hey, we have a systems thinking problem, and this is how we fix it. I was kind of fortunate. I had some complaints land in my lap. People were complaining about this, and hey, I'm not informed of this, or hey, why wasn't I told about that? Particularly our and I happen to be friends with one of the actually the gentleman. No, I happen to be friends with one of the individuals who was like, "Hey, it feels like I'm the last to know, and it's not the first time." So I had the pain point land in my lap. So from there, it's like, okay, well, systemically, we have the system communications issue, but how do I lead with a small solution? Don't call it systems thinking, and see if people like it. So I floated this, and it helped. And we still have problems, but it's improved. So if it's absolutely, if it's a pretty tough sell, and there's no pain, and people are pretty content with how it is, and budgets are set, and honestly, then it's pretty hard. But because I mean, why would anyone change for myself? Why would I change unless there's pain involved? So
Yeah.
What I've have seen, and how I would jump on this is, I see what people complained about. I wouldn't call it systems thinking or even systems engineering, but I might just sort of get people together and say, hey, we keep redoing stuff for our client, and they pay us, but this is just getting old. I want to work on this other, AI or something, but we're wasting time on this. Yeah, it sucks. So if you can collect people and then just get a brainstorming session, which is a tool, now all of a sudden you'll get some material, and then you can key off of this, and people seem to want this, but it's, from us, it's a lot of questions like, hey, what if we had it in place would have solved this, and that might get you something. Or what should we really do here to fix it? And then may get some other opinions. They're probably going to give you they may give you a systems thinking answer. They would never call it that, but now all of a sudden you got some grist, and it might take a while. Now, if there's no problem, as they say, there's no problem. So at some point it's taking a different battle. Does that help?
It does. Thank you. You're just full of wisdom, and I always like to tap into that. So thank you.
Well, it's a great question. Well, others have that question too, Cheryl. That's very pertinent.
Are there other questions from our audience?
I had a comment, or maybe also a question. I'm thinking about the value of stories of when a systems project went wrong in those situations where you're trying to convince others.
Oh, I love it. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, the people love stories, and stories are a great way to communicate. In fact, pull from Toastmasters again. They had a mantra for speech contests, which was, make a point, tell a story, make a point, tell a story, make a point, tell a story, make a point. You do that 3 times, and boom, there's your speech. So, Cheryl, or Isaac, if you could pull a pain point there and say, oh, you know what, this reminded me of this other thing, or let's say there's no pain yet, but we feel, oh, they want to skip requirements, or they're like, well, we'll just use our customer document and then that's it. Then yeah, you could say, oh, you know who else tried that? Yeah, that Spanish rail company. Holy smokes, it cost them, $100 million, and people lost their jobs or something. I mean, that's a abridged version.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely. And you know what? You do not have to look hard to find stories of catastrophe and, $200 million rework. And there was some submarine where they had it all right, except the plenum space for the cable runs weren't big enough. So they couldn't run all the cable they needed to run. They had to go in there, widen all the plenum, and oh well, that was a mess. So unfortunately, you don't have to look very far. Thanks, Isaac. Stories are absolutely a tool.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I know we're at time. Raymond, I want to thank you so much. You, as always, a wonderful speaker, and I really appreciate you giving up your hour plus to us. So I thank you kindly for doing it.
No, my pleasure. This is part of our working group call to spread the good word, not only of our artifacts, and Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate the slot, and also I know we're at time. I'm serious about the follow-up. If there's something else going on, something specific. It's yeah, it's we let's have that conversation. So it's my pleasure.
Great, thank you. And for everyone who's still on the call, I did put the survey link into the chat. So everyone has that. And I certainly look forward to seeing everyone next month at our talk. And any of you who are going to the PNNL meeting in September, please do. I know the Western State Regional Conference would love to have your attendance. And of course, those of you going to Hawaii, I'm super jealous. So I hope everyone has a wonderful, what's part of the beginning of the summer. And thank you again, Raymond. Thank you everyone for your attendance. And I will adjourn the meeting.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.